All right, I'm back with another poem, and I think I'm not sure if I have an exact place for this. It's Dale Ritterbush's poem "Taking the Easy Way." It's on page 27 of your course pack, and I see that I was supposed to talk about it on for Vietnam 4, but well, maybe I will. Okay, I'll put it in Vietnam 4. There we go. Okay. So you've now had a little taste of some of Dale's poetry. Yeah. Two of them. So here's another one. He's just such a good poet. And he's just so head and shoulders above so many of the other war poets who from Vietnam tend to, and it's the true for many of the war poets. So they sort of record, interesting truths, but they're not necessarily that sensitive to language. So you're like, yeah, that's a shocking thing, but you've read it in prose, and it's like, actually, the prose might be better. The person just saying the thing might be better. So how well is it constructed, and so on. Anyway, so this is called "Taking the Easy Way." It's a typical Dale poem. A friend of mine shot himself in the foot. Carefully aimed not to shatter a bone. Said he was just cleaning his .22 before going into the Air Force. All it did was delay his time by 3 weeks. Hardly worth it. Another guy, actually the friend of a friend in San Francisco, at the Art Institute, got drunk, popped some pills, bent his arm backwards on a table, and had someone jump on his elbow, breaking it the wrong way. Splinters of bone jutted out of his flesh, and his face just as white as his bone. Jesus, all that just to avoid the draft. And with a mind like that, he would have done just fine in Vietnam. This poem always makes me laugh because it's just such a brutal set of stories. Like no matter what, everybody is losing in this situation. So here's somebody who is a veteran, because he's gone to Vietnam. Has come back and knows what it's like, and tells these two stories basically. The first one, so the idea here is to avoid the draft, right? So these two guys have been drafted. Now, if you're drafted and you're white, and you have any knowledge of the law, or you can read, because not everybody who was drafted could read necessarily, or was that bright, or could understand necessarily what was happening to them, because a lot of the guys just couldn't. They were just not that bright, and they were just. That's why my memory is that the draft IQ is. They had these new standards, what they call the new standards men, McNamara's new standards men, and they actually dropped the IQ. I think they dropped it to 75, and I think 80 is supposed to be functional intelligence. So they just were trying to get more guys, especially by the late days of the war. They were just like, we just need to. They wanted people who wouldn't fight with them. But if you were white, or you had a college education, or you knew lawyers or something like that, then you might try various different things, and you had friends who were trying to get out of the draft. You might try various different things to get out. And one of the standard things was to maim yourself, basically. So in the novel A Prayer for Owen Meany, the main character, he's not really the main character, but the narrator who is telling the story, is drafted. And Owen Meany, who is this strange, typical John Irving sort of anti-hero, knows that he's going to be drafted. And he runs a saw. He works at a marble factory. And he says, you just have to bear a little bit of pain, and then you're safe. And what he, of course, does is cut off the guy's trigger finger. And that'll do it, usually. So you lose a limb or finger, a couple of fingers, especially trigger finger on your dominant hand. that might do it. It might not. It depends on how desperate the draft board is in your area. They might just draft you anyway and say, okay, you're going to learn to shoot with your left hand, which is, okay, that's what you're going to do. You're going to do what you're going to do. So here's this guy who took just very careful aim, didn't want to screw up his foot, not to shatter a bone. And very common. So this is very common in World War I, World War II, to have people who were in the field already have a gun accident while they were cleaning their weapon and an accidental discharge. In World War I, accidental discharge like that might get you court-martialed and hung. They did actually kill a few soldiers, but they always threatened to, and for cowardice in the face of the enemy. So this is one of the physical ways of getting out of the military if you're stuck. But let's say you don't want to go in. It's like, well, this is one of the ways. So then there's this next guy. So the first guy is does his best. He's a rational person. He takes his .22, which is not, it's not a massive, caliber that's going to blow your foot apart. He's not going to do that. It's just going to be a fairly neat, ideally a neat hole through the fleshy part of the foot. Although you have to be careful because there's a lot of bones in the foot, right? You can fuck yourself up. So, all it did was, the Air Force, was delaying his time by 3 weeks. Hardly worth it. So, you really, so he was too rational. And they're like, yeah, you shot yourself by accident? Well, we'll fix you by accident. So we'll take you anyway. So he's gone, right? Another guy, friend of a friend, so not somebody he knows directly, but he's heard the story, right? And here's this guy who, takes painkillers and then has somebody really break his limb. And this is the kind of injury that, it's you'll be lucky if you're able to use that hand again. Now, it's interesting, in World War I, there's a famous Canadian play by Roch Carrier called La Guerre, Yes Sir. And it's about the situation of the Québécois, les habitants, that is the French Canadians, who are told by the British Canadians they have to go and fight in World War I. And they're like, we don't want to go. And many, many thousands, we don't know how many thousands, but many thousands of the Habs basically just walked off into the bush because they could survive in the bush. And they were used to it. World War I, remember. So this was 1914. They were farm boys, and they were used to living rough. So, they just disappeared, and they couldn't be found. The war was over, and they came back to the civilizations. A very, very tough way to survive, but, you had to know what you were doing. But in the case at the very beginning, the reason I raise this is that it's an amazing play. I mean, it's very funny, and it's brutal and sad, but it's it's also very funny. And Roch Carrier is sort of a great. He's a famous Canadian writer and of a certain generation. So, it's a play. You can read a play in an hour. It should read like a film script does, basically. It's sort of a page a minute. And the Brits are bringing home one of the villages dead. It's a little French Canadian village. And there's going to be a massive party, or wake, basically. But before that happens, and this is how the play opens, you hear a chopping sound. And then here comes basically one of the heroes who has cut off his hand with his axe. And so the cover of the play used to be a bloody handprint on the cover because it was such a good design, because it just this is what he was like. I'm not going to a slaughter. I'll cut off my hand. And people did, right? So the second guy is like that. He's like, I'm not going to go. And the commentary from the soldier who's telling the story, the narrator, is like, man, if you're prepared to do that to yourself, you would have been just fine in a slaughter like Vietnam, which was sadistic, crazy, over the top, nuts. Right? It's an amazing poem. Okay.